Please be seated. The court is now in session. This morning, the trial chamber will hear the testimony of a civil party, Jauni. This is the additional testimony requested by Kisampon's request. That is document E250 and the decision of the TC. That is document E267/3. The civil party actually testified already on the facts within case 002/01 on the 23rd 11/2012. For that reason, parties are not allowed to put questions to this witness concerning the facts already testified by the civil party. New facts can be put through him. And toward the conclusion of his last testimony, he was given the opportunity to make his statement of suffering, and he raised a new fact at the time. But we did not conclude the proceeding regarding that new fact, and due to the request, he's been recalled. And the hearing of this civil party's testimony, the floor will be given first to Kisampon's defense. And the entire testimony for this witness will last for this morning session. Defense counsel, you may proceed.
Bonjour, monsieur.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Indeed, I question the legitimacy of the order that you have just laid out. Generally speaking, when it applies to a civil party, protocol is for the civil party lawyers to begin examination, followed by prosecution, and then the defense. I would respectfully remind Your Honors that, yes, our team had requested the recall of this witness. However, he is not our witness. We asked for his recall because when the civil party spoke on his suffering, he spontaneously evoked a new fact, and during that particular hearing, the civil party sent our team, the civil party's lawyers had sent us an email to us with respect to their questions, and once again it appears that new facts are surfacing and new issues are going to be raised, namely that the uncle of the civil party was called or was mentioned on the radio. Now, it would appear most straightforward for the civil parties to ask the questions that they deem necessary to their client, followed by the prosecution, followed by the defense. We would therefore be in a position to understand the precise contours of the new facts to be discussed and elaborated upon this morning. We believe that everybody has been given due allocation of time. Therefore, we respectfully request that the civil parties commence examinations, followed by the co-prosecutors, followed by the defense. Thank you, Your Honors.
President, thank you, counsel. Now the assigned lawyer for the lead co-lawyers, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Members, we would prefer that the protocol or the procedure that has been prescribed by Your Honors be followed. That is, for the defense to begin, followed by the prosecution, and finally by the civil parties. And the reasons we say this is for three reasons. The first, as has been actually admitted by the defense, the only reason the civil party is called here is not because of a general procedure. He has already given his evidence in chief previously last year in November. He's been called by the defense to answer what they suggest is a new allegation of fact. And both the prosecution and the civil parties have not objected to their request. It is their request to call this civil party to ask him about this question. The second reason is that they have full opportunity to ask him anything that they would wish to within their allocated time. So if they feel that in relation to this new allegation, they have additional questions to ask, they should lead by beginning to ask those questions, for example, about the radio broadcasts upon which they've now been put on notice. And third, Your Excellency, obviously it's fully within your discretion to choose the procedure now that should be followed, and we have no objection to the procedure that you've put forward.
President, thank you. We will maintain our previous decision. That is, the requester will lead the questioning of this civil party before other parties. Ms. Sakalbuti, could you report the attendance of the parties and individuals to today's proceeding? Sakalbuti, Mr. President, for today's proceedings, all parties are present. As for Noon Chi, he is present in the holding cell downstairs. As per the decision of the trial chamber due to health concern, TCCP 187 is in the waiting room to be called by the trial chamber. There is no reserved witness today. President, court officer, could you invite the civil party into the courtroom? President, Good morning. Is your name Chao Ni? Civil Party. My name is Chao Ni. Question. Mr. Chao Ni, do you recall that you were summoned by the trial chamber to testify? Do you recall the date of your testimony? Mr. Chani, please observe a small pause until you see the red light on the tip of the microphone and on the console itself, so that your voice will go through the system. In particular, it goes through to the interpretation system, as your voice will be interpreted into English and French simultaneously. Civil Party. Yeah. I testified before this court on the 22nd November 2012. Thank you. As you already testified before this trial chamber, and it is on the transcript, there is no need for the chamber to ask your personal background. However, we still would like to remind you of your right and obligation, that you're entitled to express your suffering that you suffered physically, mentally, and materially as a result of the crimes committed and which have been accused of on the true accused here in this courtroom, that is Nuji and Khieu Sampon, for their acts during the Democratic Cambodia regime. Previously, you were given the opportunity to make your statement of suffering. However, at that time, you raised a new fact. And for that reason, you've been recalled and you will be given time to make your statement of suffering again. The floor is now given to Khieu Sampon's defense to put questions to this civil party regarding all the facts considered new, which were raised by this civil party and as requested by your team. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Witness. My name is Arthur Verken. I am one of the lawyers representing Mr. Khieu Sampon. I was not present at the hearing of the 23rd of November. On that day, you spoke on your suffering, and on that same occasion, you asked to put questions directly to Mr. Khieu Sampon. First and foremost, I wish to tell you that Mr. Khieu Sampon will respond to you. However, before that, I wish to ask you a few questions on what you stated on the 23rd of November. You testified at the outset. Well, prior to reading out what you said, I will begin with the question as to whether or not you were able to reread what you stated on the hearing of the 23rd of November, or if your civil party lawyer provided you the documents, the official transcript of what you said on the 23rd of November.
No, I haven't read nor seen the document.
D'accord.
Very well, because everything that you utter in the microphone is transcribed. We have the record of your statements. There sometimes may be issues of translation, but we do have records in French, Khmer, and English of your words. In document E1/146.1, in the transcript of the court hearing of the 23rd of November, you said, "I wish to ask a question to Mr. Khieu Samphan. One of my uncles had a link with Mr. Khieu Samphan." That is the first part of what you say. Then ensues a dispute amongst the parties with respect to your right to ask questions to Mr. Khieu Samphan. I will spare you of what happened. You were then given the floor, and you say the following. On the 17th of April, 1975, on the day of liberation, Khieu Samphan wrote a letter inviting my uncle, Chau Sao, asking him to return to Phnom Penh. And I want to know why. Did Khieu Samphan end up meeting my uncle? That is my first question. My second question is the following. Mr. Chau Sao's driver in 1979, I met him in Phnom Penh. He told me this: when Chau Sao was evacuated and when he arrived in Prek Dam, there were two soldiers who delivered a letter from Khieu Samphan to him. And the content of the letter stated that Mr. Chau Sao is required to return to Phnom Penh. However, Chau Sao refused. He said that he would only return to Phnom Penh when all the Phnom Penh residents were allowed to return. And subsequently, the two soldiers returned for a second time, inviting him to come to Phnom Penh again, and he still refused. And from that time onwards, Mr. Chau Sao has since disappeared. My question to Mr. Khieu Samphan is this: where did he die? This is what I want to know. If I know where he died, I could at least try to find his remains so that I can carry out a proper religious ceremony for his soul. End of quote. Mr. Witness, is what I just read out a reflection of your memory of what you stated on the 23rd of November 2012?
Yes, all the quotes that you just read out are correct.
Ensuite,
I'll be very brief in the following questions that I have to put to you. Firstly, can you please provide the court the name of your uncle's driver?
My uncle's driver named Chien. At that time, he was about 50 years old. He was a little bit older than my uncle.
et ce monsieur est
And is that gentleman still alive? And if so, where does he live?
In 1979, I happened to meet him during a wedding celebration behind the Praput Pagoda. And of course, I never thought that this kind of tribunal would be established. And at the time, I did not ask him much. When I met with him, my wife and my mother-in-law was there, and he spoke about the events took place at Prek Kadam. At the time, he said, while fleeing at Prek Kadam, Chao Sao received a letter, as I described in my previous testimony. In the first letter, he refused to return to Phnom Penh until the people returned.
Very well. I understood that. However, I asked you a very specific question, and we won't be able to proceed swiftly if you don't answer my questions directly. We've already visited that, but I've just asked you now if that gentleman is still alive, and if so, where does your uncle's former driver reside? Do you know? That is my question.
That was the only time that I met him, and I do not know where he lived or whether he is still living today.
Est-ce que vous savez de...
And do you know from which region he is from?
I did not ask him when I met him at the time. He said when he left Chao Sao, he went to look for his family, and I did not ask him further regarding where he went to.
Combien de temps a duré votre discussion?
And in 1979, how long did your conversation with him last?
It was during a wedding ceremony, so we spoke briefly, not at length. We spoke for about 10 to 15 minutes.
Dans votre déposition,
In your testimony that I've just read out, you provided a date. You referred to the 17th of April, 1975. On the day of liberation, Khieu Samphan wrote a letter to my uncle asking him to return to Phnom Penh. Those were your exact words. Is that what the driver told you? Did the driver tell you the date, the exact date of the letter addressed from Khieu Samphan to your uncle?
No, it was not the 17th April 1975. It was about 3 days later when he arrived at Prek Dam, and when he received the letter. It was not on the 17th April 1975.
et alors pourquoi le 23?
So why on the 23rd of November 2012, when you were in the stand, why did you state that the letter was dated 17th of April 1975?
No, it's not the 17th April 1975. It was 3 days after when Chao Sao fled to Prek Dam. That is after he left his house in Tulkok.
Oui, j'ai bien compris, mais
Yes, I understood that. But it appears to me that you were correcting what you stated on the 23rd of November. But my question is, why on the 23rd of November did you cite the date of the 17th of April, 1975, and today you're telling us that it occurred 3 days later. Are you saying that you were mistaken?
President Civil Party, please observe a pause. The prosecution, you may proceed.
Your Honour, just a brief point of clarification. My reading of that transcript is that the Civil Party indicated that he thought the letter was written on the 17th of April 1975, not that the letter reached Chow Sao at Prek Dam on the 17th of April 1975. So my understanding of that reference is that it relates to perhaps the date of the letter. And I just want to make sure that we have that right so that the Civil Party is not confused.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Indeed, that was my reading and understanding of the witness's testimony. In fact, I've read it a third time just to make sure that I fully understand the words and that I cannot be accused of distorting them. And you state very clearly on the 17th of April 1975, that is, quote-unquote, the liberation, Khieu Samphan wrote a letter of invitation to my uncle, that is Chow Sao, to return to Phnom Penh. And I wish to know, Mr. Witness, when you spoke with the driver in 1978, says the speaker, if the driver told you if the letter was written on the day of liberation, that is, on the 17th of April 1975, the date that was given to you by the driver.
Response. That was what he said at that time, but the letter was received later on. The letter was dated the 17th of April, and during that time, we could hear on radio broadcast in which Cheng Heng, Srimatak, and Chow Sao were heard in the radio broadcast, and that people appealed for them, looking for them, and indeed the letter was sent, or rather was received at a later date.
And did you hear that radio broadcast back then?
Response. On the 17th of April 1975, immediately after the liberation of Phnom Penh, I still possessed a radio, and I and my mother-in-law and other relatives jointly listened to the radio broadcasts, and we heard these names mentioned in the broadcasts.
Can you remind us of what your uncle was doing back then? What was his occupation?
Response. My uncle worked at the National Credit Bank.
And the last time you saw him face to face, when was that?
Response. The last time, are you referring to 1975 or the recent time?
Bien sûr pas.
Well, not recently, of course, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I'm asking you, when was the last time you saw your uncle, no matter the moment?
Response. I was very young and I was at Olympic location when my uncle was in Tulkok. We did not meet very often, and I was young and he was holding senior position, and with that I did not have much time, or I did not meet him very often. And during the time of the liberation, he brought his assets and belongings and have them kept at my home. The home I rent at Olympic location. And I met him, the last time I met him was during prior to 1975, the 17th of April 1975. It was 3 days before the 17th of April.
D'accord.
Fine. And the letter that the driver spoke to you about, that was the first time you heard about that letter in 1979. Is that the case?
Response. Are you asking me about the letter in 1979? I think that's not the case, because I haven't received any letter in 1979, I think. Perhaps you repeat the question.
Oui, bien sûr.
Yes, of course. The letter that you, which apparently your uncle received, and which he apparently received a few days after the liberation, did you see this letter? Or did you only hear about this letter through the former driver of your uncle?
Response. The letter was received by my uncle, and I was not with him because I was leaving Phnom Penh on National Road number 2 when he was heading to National Road number 5. But later on, I received information from Mr. Chow Sao's driver about the letter, and I do not even know the content of the letter. And there was a second letter also sent out through the driver, when in the letter, because of that second letter, people were trying to locate Mr. Chow Sao's family and Chow Sao himself, but he or they were not located.
Donc il y a
So there were 2 letters. Is that what you're telling us?
J'ai bien compris.
Is that what I'm supposed to understand?
Response. Yes, there was. The driver told me that there were 2 letters, because the first letter was sent to him, and then another letter also was sent in which he asked the driver to return. That's what we heard from the driver who talked to us in detail about what Mr. Chao Sao talked to him.
Et quand vous
And when you had this discussion, this 15-minute discussion with the driver in 1979, did he tell you who had signed this second letter and when this letter was drafted?
Response: I did not ask him more about this. I only learned from him at that time. He said he left Mr. Chao Sao. He called him Lok, which means Mr. And he said that the second letter was sent to him, and 2 days after that, Mr. Chao Sao was nowhere to be located.
Mr. President, I have no further questions, but Mr. Kyosompo would like to speak to the civil party, if possible.
The President, Mr. Chao Ni, you may ask questions to Mr. Kyosompan, or Mr. Kyosompan can put questions to Mr. Chao Ni, but through the President of the Chamber. Council Kong Samon, Mr. President, I may wish to correct this version a little bit. Just now, Mr. Kyosompan did not wish to speak with the civil party, but during his last time when he came to take the stand, he asked a question to Mr. Kyosompan to which he has not received the response, and perhaps this is the opportunity for Mr. Kyosompan to respond. The President, Mr. Civil Party, would you still wish to put your question you would like to ask Mr. Kyosompan a moment or a while ago, and that during that time there was technical difficulty that your question could not be conveyed to Mr. Kyosompan. Now, may we ask whether you still wish to ask the same question? Civil Party. Thank you, Mr. President and Your Honors. I may wish to ask the same question, but with additional information. The President, you may repeat that question, but one question at a time, and then the President of the Trial Chamber will convey your question to Mr. Kyosompan so that he can respond, but he appears to be ready to respond to your questions. Question. I would like to repeat that question, and I would like to also add a few words into that old question. My question is, Mr. Kyosompan, what was the letter you sent to my uncle about? Because during the first time, he rejected to return to Phnom Penh unless all the people were allowed to return to Phnom Penh. And secondly, why did Mr. Chao Sao ask his driver to return and look for the driver's family? And that why he asked his driver not to be involved with him again? And why Mr. Chao Sao disappeared ever since? If Mr. Kyosompan knows where Mr. Chao Sao died or disappeared, if so, can Mr. Kyosompan tell me please where he could have disappeared or died, so that we can find the place where he could have died and where we can hold a traditional ritual ceremony. The President, Mr. Chao Ni, you asked the questions, but the questions were rather long already. But we would like to make sure that one question is put at a time. And now we understand that Mr. Kyusampon has listened to the questions, and we would like to hand the floor over to him to respond. Mr. Kyusampon. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning to everyone in this courtroom. My apology. Good morning to every fellow Cambodian citizen, and good morning to you, Mr. Chao Ni. Allow me to inform you that I used to know Mr. Chao Sao during the 1960s. He was the president of a bank, the National Credit Bank. I understand your feeling, your suffering, and how your family could have felt by trying to find out about your uncle's whereabouts and information and his fate. And you also emphasize that if Mr. Chao Sao were or passed away, you would like to bring his remains for Buddhist ritual ceremony. Unfortunately, I have no information at all about the fate of your uncle, and I did not have any information about him during the Democratic Cambodia. And you said somebody told you that I wrote letters to your uncle. Please be confirmed. Please understand that I didn't do that. I never written such a letter. There was no soldier under my order or command so that I could send a letter to someone, like you said. And as you already are aware, I was compelled to flee Phnom Penh. I had to leave behind my sick mother, who had been staying with me all along. I had to leave behind my younger siblings, who had been supported by me since 1967. From then on, your uncle and I, myself, never had the opportunity to meet one another again. So, in conclusion, there was or there is no means for me to send any letter to your uncle. On top of that, it was not possible that it was my intention to look for your uncle or to call him to return to Phnom Penh. Today, I may wish to also tell you that I fully appreciate the sufferings you and your family could have had. I fully understand that you have the sympathy with or towards your uncle. And for this reason, I would like to take this opportunity to talk to you in person so that you understand my heart. I am talking this from the bottom of my heart so that everything is clear and that your mind is clear. I feel sorry that there is no way I can help you to entertain your request or to answer to your request, and I hope you understand me and my situation. That's all. I thank you. The President. Next, Mr. Chau Sao, would you wish to, rather Mr. Chau Ni, would you wish to say anything else? Mr. Chau Ni, Mr. President, I'm still not satisfied because Mr. Khieu Samphan and Mr. Chau Sao were very close because Mr. Khieu Samphan would come to eat at Mr. Chau Sao's home at Tuol Kok. I still feel that he has not told me all the truth. I don't really say that he has killed my uncle, but I just wish to get more truthful information from him. The President. Counsels for Mr. Khieu Samphan already asked you clearly about the source of information that makes you believe that Khieu Samphan was the one who sent the letters through the soldier to Mr. Chau Sao. But through the cross-examination, you indicated that there was no strong source of information about this, and the connection regarding the sending of the letter and who sent the letter was already established during the examination. Next, we would like to hand over to the co-prosecutors to put some questions to the civil party regarding this new allegation of fact, if they would wish to do so.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Honours, will be very brief by way of following up on my friend's questions. Thank you for coming back, Mr. Chau Ni. We understand it's not easy for you to discuss these matters. If I can return to the discussion that you had with Chau Sao's driver about these letters, can I first ask you whether he told you that he saw this letter personally?
Response. At that time, when he told me, he said he was told by Chao Sao about the letters. However, what the letter was about was not communicated to me. And he said that there were two letters, and that during the second time, when the second letter was delivered to Chao Sao, that the person who delivered the letter was asked by Chao Sao to return.
So just to make sure we understand that correctly, it was Chao Sao that told Ching, the driver, that he had received a letter from Q Sampan. Is that, have I got that correct?
Response: yes, it is.
And do I understand correctly, or let me ask that question differently. When did Chao Sao say this to Chiang?
Response: regarding the first letter, upon receiving it, Mr. Chao Sao told the two soldiers that he would not return. But for the second letter, he did not say anything. But he asked, or he told Chien to return to his family.
I understand. My question is simply about the conversation, the first conversation between Chao Sao and Chiang when he told him about the first letter. Do you know when that conversation took place? Was that 3 days after evacuation? Was it sometime after that?
Response: it was a few days, 2 or 3 days after the 17th of April when he talked about this. And he received this information just 2 or 3 days after the 17th of April.
Did Chiang tell you how long after the first letter it was that the second letter was received by Chao Sao?
Response: the second letter was sent a few days after the first letter was sent. And again, as I told you, that with the second letter, Mr. Chao Sao didn't tell anything to Mr. Chiang other than asking him to come back. So Chiang only told me that Chao Sao told him to come back, and that's the last time they met.
I'm sorry if I'm insisting on a very specific point. If you don't know, just tell me so. The first letter, approximately 3 days after the 17th of April. The second letter, do we know when that letter was apparently received?
Response: I only say what Chiang told me. The first letter was sent, and then the second one was sent about 2 days after the first one.
Thank you. Did Chao Sao tell Chiang what was written in that second letter?
Response: Are you referring to the second letter?
Yes, the second letter. If you know anything about, or if you were told anything about what was written in that second letter.
Response. Chao Sao did not say anything at all about what written in the second letter. He just told Chin to come back to be with Chin's family, that's all.
I just want to clarify that last point. In the passage that my learned friend, counsel for Mr. Khieu Samphan, read to you, in that passage you mentioned that the second letter was also an invitation to return to Phnom Penh. Is that correct, or are you not sure about the content of that second letter?
The President, Mr. Sibupati, please hold on, and International Co-Counsel for Mr. Khieu Samphan, you may proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Simply for purposes of clarification for the witness as well as for the prosecutor, I read out to the witness what he had said on the 23rd of November, and on the 23rd of November he only spoke about one single letter. So when the prosecutor claims that I read to the witness an excerpt referring to a second letter, that's not at all the case, because on the 23rd of November the witness only spoke about one single letter. So I just want to make this clear so that we don't go off on a tangent.
Thank you, counsel. The reason I'm referring to the second instance, I'll read that quote for the record, and it's as follows, quote, "And subsequently, the two soldiers returned for the second time, inviting him," that is Chao Sao, "to come to Phnom Penh again, and he still refused. And from that time onward, Mr. Chao Sao disappeared." So that's the passage I was referring to. So with your permission, Mr. President, I'll ask the civil party one more time whether he knows anything about that content of the letter, because he seems to have suggested on the 23rd of November that there was another invitation, that there was a second invitation. So can I ask you, Mr. Chow Ni, and if I did not understand that correctly, please do correct the record. This is important. Am I correct in understanding that when the soldiers returned for the second time, that was to ask Chao Sao again to return to Phnom Penh?
Chien told me that there was the first letter and the second letter, but it is my understanding that the second letter also is an invitation for him to return to Phnom Penh, but he refused because he would only go if people were to go. But the thing is, for the second letter, upon he received it, he asked Chien to return to his family. But I did not know what was the content of the second letter and why he asked his driver to return to his family. It is beyond my understanding.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. You mentioned also that you believe that Khieu Samphan knew Chow Sao and had, I believe you may have said, visited him in the 1960s, and Mr. Khieu Samphan just confirmed, of course, that he left Phnom Penh in 1967. Can you tell the court what you know about Chow Sao's activities, what he did from late 1960s up to 1975, whatever information you're able to give us?
At that time, I was pretty young. When he met with Khieu Samphan, my mother was there. She lived in a wooden house behind Chow Sao's house, and he told me that today my uncle invited Khieu Samphan for a meal, and then she would ask me to go to the wooden house at the back. But I did not know the depth of the relationship between Chow Sao and Khieu Samphan. But at that time, he frequently visited Chow Sao at his house.
Do you know anything about positions that Chow Sao held from 1970 to 1975? What he did, what his job was?
From 1970 to 1975, I only know that he was the president of a bank, and later on he formed a political party, that is a democratic political party. That's all I know.
Thank you. Because truth is very important, and it's important that the court receives as accurate information as possible, I'm under a duty to ask you this following question. From my conversations with your lawyers, I understand that Chow Sao was your wife's uncle. And I'll ask you to just clarify that for us, because it is important that we have that right. Was Chow Sao your uncle, or was he your wife's uncle?
Chow Sao was my wife's uncle.
Thank you, and I have no further question. Mr. President, thank you for the time allocated to us.
President, thank you. The floor is now given to the lead co-lawyers for civil parties to put additional questions to this civil party. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chow, I'll have very few questions. You've been very brave in your answers today and in the questions that you have asked. I just want to have clarification on a few points that you made, especially since they've been raised both by the defense and by the prosecution, and also ask you a little bit about Chow Sao. For the benefit of the court, could we know, you've mentioned earlier that Mr. Chow Sao, your wife's uncle, and a person you referred to as uncle, was the head of the National Credit Bank. Can you tell us a little bit more about his reputation in the 1960s and the early 1970s amongst the Khmer Krom population in Cambodia?
Allow me to respond. Mr. Chow Sao was very famous to the people from Khmer Krom. He was a person of justice. He was not a corrupt person. He earned his living honestly, and he assisted the Khmer Krom people in finding their employment and their place to live. So he was very famous amongst the Khmer Krom people in Phnom Penh.
Thank you. And given that he was quite famous amongst the Khmer Krom people, were there many Khmer Krom who also worked with him at the National Credit Bank, where he was the managing director?
At that time, a lot of staff working at the National Credit Bank were Khmer Krom, namely Giang, who is still living, and Chao Sot, my relative, but Chao Sot passed away during the Khmer Rouge regime. Yes, indeed, there were the majority of the staff working in that bank were the Khmer Krom. Chao Ban, whose house I rented at Olympic during that time, also worked in that bank.
Thank you. So just to repeat, as you've mentioned to the court previously, Chow Sao used to live in Tol Kok during that period, and he was well known to many Khmer Krom. And Chow Ban, your cousin brother, whose house you lived in Olympic Stadium, was owned by Chow Ban, who also worked for Chow Sao at the National Credit Bank. Is that correct?
Chao Ban worked differently from Chao Sao's place. It was known as Sony Prim. That's the place where he worked, not at the bank. But a lot of people from Khmer Krom were supported by Chao Sao, and later on they were employed in that bank.
You mentioned earlier to the court, Mr. Chowni, that you had heard from your mother and from your other relatives that Chow Sao would have known Q Sampan very well and they had meals together. Is that correct?
My mother-in-law clearly told me that, because every time Chow Sao made a guest, then my mother-in-law would tell me, because they did not have their parents. Their parents passed away a long time ago, and there were only 3 siblings within the family, and they loved each other very much. Later on, in 1974, my mother-in-law fled to Khmer Krom. So during the liberation, she did not live with Chao Sao. But in 1979, she came looking for Chao Sao and looking for her relatives, but all disappeared. And she almost became mentally ill due to the loss of the relatives.
Thank you. Mr. Chowni, you mentioned earlier about the radio broadcasts on the national radio that were going on in 1975 after the Khmer Rouge came into power. And you said that in this radio broadcast, you had also heard Chow Sao's name, Sisawat Srikmatak's name, and Ching Heng's name being called. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. On the 17th April 1975, Srikmatak, Ching Heng, and Chao Sao's names were heard on the radio broadcast. But the broadcasts, including his name, were only for about 3 days, and later on, his name was not heard anymore on the national broadcast.
I see. So just to clarify, when you heard the names of all these 3 people, my question is first, were they being asked to come back to Phnom Penh? My first question, please.
If I am not mistaken, the broadcast was for those people to return to Phnom Penh, to return to their previous workplace.
And I know the court knows this, so it has been mentioned in court before, but from your understanding, who were these other 2 people? Who were Cheng Heng and Sisawat Sirik Matak, from your understanding?
These 2 individuals, in between 1970 to 1975, they were the supreme leaders under the Lon Nol government.
Okay. So 2 high-level members of the Lon Nol government and Mr. Chow Sao, a very well-known Khmer Krom national banker, were asked to return to Phnom Penh soon after the Khmer Rouge came into power. That's your evidence. Why do you think that in following radio broadcasts, a few days later, Mr. Chow Sao's name was not included anymore? In your view?
After that, I could not understand it anymore because the high-ranking leaders were called, but to me, why Chow Sao was called to return? Because he was simply a banker. So, to me, I do not understand the reasons for the calling of these people, including Chow Sao. Or whether it's because of his origin as a Khmer Krom. That's why he was called. I do not know the real reason behind it.
I just have 2 final questions, Mr. Chowni. The first question, if we could just go back very quickly to the second letter that you mentioned earlier. So as you have told the court, there were 2 times, from what you've heard from Mr. Cheng, the driver, there were 2 times that Mr. Chow Sao was met with by Khmer Rouge soldiers and 2 times that he was given a letter. I'm referring now to the second time. The second time that the soldiers met Mr. Chow Sao and they gave him a letter, you've told the court that Mr. Chow Sao asked his driver to return home to his family. And after that, no one knows what happened to Mr. Chow Sao, and he's never been found again. In your view, why do you think Mr. Chow Sao asked his driver to return home safely to his family and not to accompany him anymore?
It is my understanding that there will be problems for Chow Sao in the second letter. For that reason, he asked Chin, the driver, to return to his family. It is likely, in my view, that at the time, the Democratic Cambodia consider Chao Sao as a Khmer crown, and for that reason he would be executed immediately. This is just my understanding.
And my final question is more of a question for you it's more of a personal question, Mr. Chowni. You've had now this opportunity to be in court twice, and on this occasion answer questions regarding this issue, regarding Mr. Chao Sao. Can you explain to the court perhaps why it has been so important for you to find out the truth about your relative and your wife's late uncle, Mr. Chao Sao? Please let the court know, in your own feelings.
Allow me to respond. And why do I need to find the relatives or the remaining of Mr. Chao Sao? We were born in Khmer Crown, but when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I was brought to Phnom Penh to live and be raised by Chao Sao. And he did not only help my family, but also other Khmer Crown people in Phnom Penh. In Cambodia, everybody knew he was a good-hearted person. He would help and gave support to any Khmer Crown who came to seek help in Phnom Penh. So to me, it is a great loss for Chao Sao.
Thank you, Mr. Chowni. Mr. President, I'm just going to hand it over to my learned senior, Mr. Ang Pik.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Mr. Chowni. I have some questions for you, in addition to the questions that have already put to you. First of all, I'd like to ask you about the personality of the driver, that is Mr. Chien. Did you meet Chien prior to 17 April 1975? If so, what was he like? Answer: I did not meet Chien before 17 April 1975, but my wife had lived with Chien. Question: what did your wife think of Chien? Did she ever talk to you about Chien? Was he the person of a truthful nature? Answer: my wife told me that before my uncle Chao Sao selected a driver, he had to understand the feeling and the mentality of that driver very well. Chien was a strict-mannered person. President, Counsel, you need to use the time effectively and put the questions to the fact before us, and not the indirect evidence that you're trying to get through, or a rumor or hearsay, because these kind of things will not contribute to ascertaining the truth at all. Mr. President, what I'm trying to get through, President interrupts. Please use your methodology to try to get to the actual facts before us so that we can also consider those facts rather than use questions relying on a hearsay, for instance, or indirect evidence, which is not appropriate for the time before this court. Counsel Pech Ong. Mr. Chao Ni, when you met with Chien in 1979, and you stated that you met him in the presence of your wife and your mother-in-law, did the three of you form the view that what was told by Chien was truthful? Answer. I knew that Chien told me the truth because Chien was a driver for Chao Sao since the time that he became the president of the National Credit Bank. So it is my opinion that he did not tell us a lie. Question. In the information given to you by Chien, did he tell you about the true soldiers, where they belong to, for instance? Answer. He did not tell us who they were, but he said that the soldiers wore black uniform and had a scarf or chroma on their neck. So they were the soldiers of the Liberation Armed Forces, because at that time the country was already liberated. Counsel, I have two more questions for you. Question. Amongst the Khmer Rouge leaders, in your opinion, who had the closest contact or relationship with your uncle? Can you entertain the court? Answer. The person who had the contact, the closest contact with my uncle Chao Sao is the only one, that is Mr. Kieu Sampon. I will skip to my last question, and I'd like now to conclude my questioning time. And I thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Civil Party, for your effort in trying to answer our questions. Thank you. President, Defense Counsel for Kieu Sampon, do you wish to add anything else?
Non, Monsieur.
No, Mr. President.
President, thank you. Mr. Chao Ni, the chamber already informed you that you will be given the opportunity as a civil party to exercise your right to express your statement of suffering and the harms inflicted upon you physically, mentally, and materially, which are the direct consequences of the crimes which have been alleged against the accused, and that happened during the Democratic Cambodia regime. If you wish to do so, you may proceed. civil party. The suffering that I went through the Democratic Cambodia regime could not be described in words. However, the loss of my family and relatives and the pain that I suffered until today remained with me. I tried to forget it since 1979 until 1985 or 86, and I try not to recall my past, and until the establishment of this court by the government, which is of its hybrid nature with the United Nations, and that triggered my pain, the pain that I suffered during the Democratic Cambodia regime. My relatives, my uncles, they were all the people who had quite a senior positions in the previous government, but after the 17th April 1975, I lost them all. I lost everyone, and the pain and the suffering was unbearable. It remains with me till the rest of my life. And now I have the opportunity to appear before Your Honor, and the only thing that I want to ask is ask for the whereabouts of my late uncle, so that I can find his skeleton remains, so that we can have a religious ritual ceremony for him. But now my hope disappears, and only the pain remains. Two of my other siblings of my wife also died, together with Chao Sao. My nieces and nephews also died. My uncle in Posat also died 3 days after the liberation. So, for all those people who were of Khmer Krom origins, they all died. I do not know the reasons why they took revenge against the Khmer Krom people. Even the children, the innocent children, were also killed because of their Khmer Krom origin. And of course, Mr. Khieu Sampon should understand that, because you used to have meal with the Khmer Krom people. And why among the Khmer Rouge people, why they hated the Khmer Krom so much? You should have known that. Khmer Krom people, President, Mr. Civil Party, please try to make your statement directly related to the suffering and not to raise any new fact. Please mention the actual suffering that you have, which is the time that you are given the opportunity by this chamber, and do not raise any new fact. Only state your statement of suffering related to the crimes alleged against the accused. Because otherwise you will have to be recalled again and again. Thank you.
Chani, the great sufferings I have had is nothing other than the loss of my parents and my uncle and relatives. That's all, Mr. President and Your Honors. I thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. The President. Thank you, Mr. Chowny. The additional testimony that you gave to the chamber and the session has now come to an end. You are now excused, and your testimony will help ascertain the truth. We wish you all the very best. Court officer is now directed to assist with the vessel unit to ensure that Mr. Chowny is returned safe and sound. The hearing today comes to an end, and it is because the chamber has not scheduled to hear additional civil party or witness for today's sessions. The chamber still has other pending issues to deal with, and for that reason the chamber may adjourn now, and we note that International Court Prosecutor is on his feet. You may proceed.
Mr. President, I do apologise for delaying the conclusion of proceedings. I'll be extremely brief. I'm on my feet simply out of abundance of caution. We didn't have notice prior to this morning's hearing that Q Sampan would be answering questions. Of course, as you have indicated, Mr. President, on prior occasions he has not exercised his right to remain silent. The reason I'm on my feet is because I want to make sure that in future proceedings the allegation is not made that the prosecution has waived its rights to examine the accused. Under Rule 90, of course, the chamber has a duty to examine the accused, and the prosecutors and other parties have a right to question the accused. And I'm on my feet to make sure that that everybody is informed that the prosecution insists on being afforded that right, and to respectfully ask the chamber, if possible, to take this into account in your scheduling in these final stages of the trial. If possible, aware of the view that it would be helpful to give as much notice to the accused as well as to other parties of when his questioning is to be scheduled, so that we can all be prepared and the proceedings can unfold in an orderly manner. That is my application.
The President, Mr. Chowny, you may now leave the courtroom, please. Parties to the proceedings, if you wish to make any observation regarding this application by the co-prosecutor, you may now do so. The President, Mr. Pek Ang, legal lawyer for the civil parties, you may proceed first. Counsel Pek Ang. Good morning again, Mr. President and Your Honors. For the civil parties, when the question was put by a civil party to the accused, that question was made in the first place because we are convinced that any response by the accused to the question would help heal the psychological wound the civil party has had. Nonetheless, legal lawyers for the civil parties share the position by the co-prosecutor that if the accused would like to respond to any of the questions, parties should be offered the opportunity to question him. And it is true that a civil party will mention, speak about the suffering, express the statement of suffering, and with that, the civil party should be allowed to speak to the best of his or her knowledge about the suffering, because things about the suffering falls very well within the scope of this jurisdiction. Mr. Kil Sompon's counsel, you may now proceed, says the President.
I didn't understand what my colleague was proposing. I'm willing to answer the other questions, of course.
The President, not only you have problem understanding the statement by lead co-lawyer for the civil party. I believe that the bench itself is not properly informed. So we would like counsel to restate the statement again. Counsel Pick Ong. Thank you, Mr. President. I will make myself clearer this time. Civil party expressed the statement of suffering, and this civil party did the same. And in his statement, normally when it comes to suffering, the suffering will have to be connected to the facts. The facts may include the old and the new facts, and it is normal. And this is the observation by lead co-lawyers for the civil parties. And that during such expression of suffering, if a new allegation of fact is raised, the chamber should not say that it is the error on the part of the civil party who raises such a new fact, which invokes another call for an additional hearing for that new fact. So I believe that my humble request is now clearly conveyed to the chamber and the parties to the proceeding. And if it is still not clear, I may wish to also add a few more words. The President, as the President of the chamber, I am entitled, and it is my discretion to direct any parties to the proceeding regarding how the statement the civil party is making falls within the scope of these proceedings. And the chamber is trying its best to ensure that no new allegation of fact is made or brought about in the statement of suffering, because by doing so, the chamber will have to revisit it and schedule another session for that. And with that, the chamber has already instructed counsel to also discuss this with their clients so that the suffering statement would be confined to only the old facts. And it saves the court a lot of time by not making it schedule another hearing, because the new fact keeps occurring every time a civil party is expressing his or her statement of suffering. And we do this because we would like to make sure that time is not wasted. And with that, we would like to hand over to counsel for Mr. Kil Sompong.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe that we are dealing here with fundamental matters. This is why, since the beginning of this week, I brought this up. In our opinion, it is necessary to have a trial for an accused person to be tried, acquitted, or sentenced. In our opinion, it's necessary to have a trial for a civil party or complainant to become a victim, or at least a victim in legal terms. And what my colleague Pekong has just said underlines specifically the difficulty that I brought up at the beginning of this week. That is to say, next week, your chamber summoned civil parties who will only speak about their suffering. And in our eyes, in the defense team, this is some kind of leap in time. That is to say, suddenly with people who will come next week, we will be able to economize on the trial. These people are considered de facto victims.
The President, Council, your response would not be relevant because co-prosecutor just submitted an application about the rights of the accused to remain silent or to respond to questions on conditions, because accused may choose to respond to only some questions when he may not wish to respond to others. That is part of the application made by the co-prosecutor, and now you are responding to the observation by the lead co-lawyer, who is in support of the previous submission by the co-prosecutors. Indeed, this has already been dealt with, because lead co-lawyers was mentioning about the civil parties who need to be allowed to express the statement of suffering by way of perhaps going into new facts. But all in all, lead co-lawyer is in support of the submission made earlier on by the co-prosecutor. Now, the opportunity given to you now is to respond to that submission by the co-prosecutor. So, may we hear from you straightforward to the application by this co-prosecutor regarding the rights to remain silent by the accused person other than responding to the lead co-lawyer for the civil parties?
What I simply want to say, Mr. President, is that we are speaking about suffering without facts grounding the suffering. And this indeed is what my civil party colleague has acknowledged. Now, regarding, I don't in fact really understand whether we're speaking here about a request or an opportunity for the co-prosecutor to state his wishes, meaning that he does not renounce putting questions to Khieu Samphan. There are several layers in his application, it seems. First of all, his final statements focusing on the necessity for the prosecution to organize itself. We asked for a trial management meeting, and up until today, my colleague, myself, my colleagues, all parties here are completely unaware of your chamber's schedule except for next week. We don't know where we're going. We don't know how many witnesses will come testify. And we don't know when this trial will end. There are rumors, of course. I have no information. We asked for a trial management meeting to deal with these issues for us to have visibility. So there are pending requests with no answers coming from parties. For example, my colleague is making a semi-request today, and I'm making a request as well. I'd like to know where we are, and
the President, Council, please limit your response to that, to the co-prosecutor's application or request, or what raised by the co-prosecutor. regarding the rights to remain silent by your client, or the right to respond to some questions and then the right to remain silent again. So please confine this comment only on that particular relevant request. Today we have just heard from you that you have not been informed regarding how the trial chamber apprised parties to the proceedings of the scheduling of the proceedings. It is today that we learned from you, but we will set this aside and we will deal with this issue at a later date. Now the chamber wishes to know from you your position regarding your response to the submission by the co-prosecutor, and if then we have to address your other issue, then we may continue the hearing today until we have all problems solved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, regarding this application, I didn't understand my prosecution's application as a request, so I apologize for not being able to answer, because I just feel that he just wanted to state the fact that he does not renounce or waive his rights to put questions to Kyusampong. So I don't have any particular reaction in relation to this. I'm just taking note of the
The President, we would like to now hand over to Judge Sylvia Cartwright to respond to parties to the proceeding on this. Judge Cartwright, you may now proceed.
Yes, there are two matters that the President has asked me to comment on. They are interlinked. The first is the matter raised by the co-prosecutors, which leaves the Chamber with this specific question for the accused Nguyen Chia and Kyo Sampon. Do they intend to elect to retain their right to remain silent, or will they answer questions? Now, Mr. Kyo Sampan may well be in a position to confirm that now. Mr. Nguyen Chia may need a little more time, and Council can advise the Chamber how much time they need to answer that question. That then gives rise to the management issues. Contrary to what Mr. Verken has indicated, the trial chamber is planning a trial management meeting. It takes time to plan the agenda, and the chamber also needs to know basic information such as those questions that have just been asked. It is intended to have such a trial management meeting within the next few weeks, and Council and the parties will be informed of the agenda as soon as we have had time to meet to clarify it. During that trial management meeting, should the accused elect to answer questions, the Chamber will be asking the other parties how much time they estimate that they will need to put questions to the two accused. And finally, it should be emphasized that Kyo Sampan and Nguyen Chia will both have the opportunity during submissions to make statements. This is a separate issue altogether. Now, do the parties understand now? Mr. Kyo Sampan, are you able now to tell the Chamber whether you wish to speak whether you wish to answer questions as you have indicated previously, or whether you wish to retain your right to remain silent? Mr. Kyo Sampan. I did ask Mr. Kyo Sampan and Mr. Verken.
I'm aware of this. I know. Simply, I don't know why we could not discuss this important issue. I understand that you put this question to Kyo Sampan, but however, I mean, things are going both ways. We do not know who the remaining witnesses are, and and you're telling us that Mr. Kyo Sampan is the one obstructing.
Mr. Verken, that was not the question that was asked. As part of the planning for the final stages of the trial, it is necessary to find out whether the accused intend to exercise their right to remain silent, and time will then be allocated if they choose to answer questions. This is part and parcel of everyday trial management, including remaining witnesses. And you will be informed as soon as we are in a position to give you that final information. Now, Mr. Kyo Sampan, I would be very grateful if you could indicate to the Chamber whether you are prepared to answer questions. Of course, the Chamber will accommodate your needs. If you feel you can't speak for a very long time or any matters like that, we will certainly take that into account. But we do need this basic information now, and I'm sure you understand that. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Judge. Good morning, Your Honors. This matter is the matter of me being prosecuted, and the allegations against me are of a serious nature. And personally, I am not fully familiar with all the legal aspects of this court. For that reason, I seek permission from Your Honor to consult with my counsel first. This morning, I responded to Chao Ni's request because of my true feeling toward his pain and suffering. And I took the opportunity in the presence of Mr. Chao Ni to do that. That is all, Your Honor.
Yes, thank you, President. We note what you have said, Mr. Kyo Sampan. Of course, you may have the opportunity to ask your legal advisors about the court processes. We are agreed that both you and Nguyen Chia will have until Monday morning at 9 a.m. to inform the trial chamber of your decisions. Mr. Korpi, is that acceptable also to you?
I think so.
President, thank you, Judge Cartwright. The proceeding today is adjourned, and we will resume on Monday the 27th of May 2013, starting from 9 a.m. On Monday, we will hear some civil parties' testimonies who will make their statement of sufferings and statement of harms under the Democratic Cambodia regime. May all the parties and the public be informed. Security guards joined Sati to take the two accused back to the detention facility and have them return to the courtroom on Monday 27th of May 2013 before 9 a.m. As for Nguyen Chia, bring him to the holding cell downstairs, which is equipped with audio-video equipment for him to follow the proceeding. The court is now adjourned.